husband discovers wife's affair and that she is pregnant with his son's best friend's child. Still reeling from the betrayal, a husband begins to plot his revenge against wife and the young man. Lawrence had always thought of his home as a sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the outside world couldn't reach him. But today, as he stood frozen in the doorway, his sanctuary crumbled into ruins. The words he had just overheard echoed in his mind, shattering his reality. Clotilde, his wife of 15 years, was pregnant, but the child wasn't his. It belonged to Jason, their son's best friend. He felt a cold numbness spreading through his body as he stepped back, unnoticed. The laughter and chatter from the living room, where Clotilde and Jason sat, seemed distant now, like a cruel mockery of the family life he had cherished. He retreated to the solitude of his study, his sanctuary within a sanctuary, now tainted with betrayal. Lawrence sank into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His mind raced, yet time seemed to stand still. He remembered the signs he had foolishly ignored, the secretive phone calls, Clotilde's sudden late-night errands, and the way she had recently avoided his gaze. How could he have been so blind? The walls of the room, once lined with happy family photographs, now felt like silent witnesses to his ignorance. His thoughts turned to Jason, a young man he had watched grow up, treated almost like a second son. The betrayal stung with an added layer of deceit. And his own son, Alex, how would he react to this devastating revelation? The thought of Alex's pain intertwined with his own, amplifying the agony. Lawrence's heart ached as he thought of Clotilde's pregnancy. He had always wanted another child, but Clotilde insisted they were past that stage in their lives. The irony of the situation was a bitter pill to swallow. He felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly drowned by a profound sense of loss. The future he had envisioned, growing old with Clotilde, watching their grandchildren play in the garden, all of it was now an impossible dream. As the initial shock subsided, a deep-rooted anger began to take hold. Lawrence realized he couldn't stay under the same roof as Clotilde, not with the lies and deceit that now filled the air. He needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out his next steps. But one thing was clear: he couldn't live with this betrayal. He had to leave. With a heavy heart, Lawrence quietly packed a few essentials. Each item he placed in his bag felt like he was packing away fragments of the life he once knew. He took one last look around the study, his eyes lingering on a photo of him and Clotilde in happier times. With a sigh, he turned off the light and closed the door behind him. Stepping out into the cool evening air, Lawrence felt a strange sense of liberation mixed with sorrow. The path ahead was uncertain and daunting, but he knew he had to walk it alone. As he drove away from the house, the only home he had known for so many years, a single thought echoed in his mind: everything had changed, and there was no turning back. The night enveloped Lawrence as he drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past him like fleeting memories. He finally pulled over at an old, familiar park where he and Clotilde had often taken Alex as a child. The empty playground under the moonlight seemed like a ghostly reminder of a life that once was. Sitting on a cold bench, Lawrence's mind raced with turbulent thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of Clotilde, carrying another man's child, a child that should have been his. The betrayal cut deeper than he had ever imagined possible. It was then, in that moment of despair, that the seed of vengeance took root in his heart. He began to plot his revenge against Clotilde and Jason. It had to be meticulous, something that would hit them where it hurt the most. Lawrence knew it was a dark path, but the pain and humiliation he felt demanded retribution. He thought of exposing their affair publicly, ruining their reputations, but that seemed too fleeting, too easy. He wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain he was experiencing. As the night turned into the early hours of the morning, a plan started to form. Lawrence knew about an investment deal Jason was desperately trying to secure to start his own business. Sabotaging this deal would crush Jason's dreams, just as his had been crushed. As for Clotilde, he knew her social standing and her role in the local charity were her pride. Disrupting this would tarnish the image she so carefully maintained. The cold dawn broke as Lawrence returned to his now desolate house. He moved around like a ghost, collecting evidence of the affair: texts, emails, anything that could be used. He felt a strange detachment, as if he was watching someone else take over his life. With each piece of evidence, his resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, he convinced himself. Over the next few days, Lawrence executed his plan with cold precision. He sent anonymous tips to the investors about Jason's unreliability and immaturity, subtly hinting at his indiscretions. The deal, crucial for Jason's future, began to unravel. Watching from afar, Lawrence felt a bitter satisfaction, but it was short-lived. The void in his heart remained, unfilled by Jason's downfall. Turning his attention to Clotilde, Lawrence began to leak hints of her affair to their social circle, carefully orchestrating it to look like idle gossip. He watched as her friends started to distance themselves, as whispers followed her at events. Clotilde's confusion and distress were evident, even from a distance. But as he watched her world crumble, Lawrence felt no joy. Instead, a profound emptiness began to settle in. With each act of revenge, he expected relief, a sense of justice, but all he felt was a growing void, an unshakable loneliness. In a moment of clarity, Lawrence realized that his quest for vengeance was not easing his pain, but amplifying it. He had hoped to find closure in their suffering, but all he found was a mirror reflecting his own brokenness. The realization hit him hard. Had he lost himself in this vendetta? What had he become? As the chapter closes, Lawrence is left to grapple with the consequences of his actions, questioning whether the path of revenge was ever worth it, and if redemption was still within reach. The days following his calculated strikes against Clotilde and Jason were hollow for Lawrence. He had envisioned a sense of satisfaction, a feeling of justice served, but instead, he was met with a haunting emptiness. The more he saw the effects of his actions, the more he realized the depth of his own descent. Lawrence watched from a distance as Jason's dreams crumbled. The young man, once full of ambition and drive, now seemed lost, his hopes for the future dashed by the collapse of his business deal. Lawrence couldn't ignore the parallel between Jason's crushed dreams and his own shattered life. A part of him wanted to feel victorious, but instead, he felt an unexpected pang of guilt. He had intended to punish a traitor, but in doing so, had he lost a part of his humanity? Meanwhile, Clotilde's world was also unraveling. The social circles she once dominated were now closing in on her, their whispers sharp as knives. Lawrence saw the pain in her eyes, the confusion and hurt caused by the betrayal of friends. He had wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal as he had, but witnessing her distress firsthand stirred a conflict within him. The woman he had loved for so many years, the mother of his child, was suffering because of him. Was this really the justice he sought? As Lawrence grappled with these conflicting emotions, his relationship with his son, Alex, took a toll. Alex was caught in the crossfire, torn between his father and mother, and struggling to make sense of the upheaval in his family. Lawrence realized that his actions, driven by anger, were not just punishing Clotilde and Jason, but also hurting the one person he had vowed to always protect. This realization hit Lawrence hard. He had embarked on this path of revenge believing it would heal his wounds, but it had only served to deepen them. His anger, once a driving force, now felt like a heavy chain, dragging him further into despair. The more he reflected on his actions, the more he recognized the futility of his vendetta. Revenge had not brought peace, only more pain. One evening, Lawrence found himself at the same park where he had conceived his plan of vengeance. The playground was empty, the swings moving gently in the breeze. It was here, in this place of childhood innocence, that the weight of his actions truly sank in. He had become someone he didn't recognize, someone consumed by anger and revenge. He had to make a choice: continue down this path or find a way to let go of his anger and move forward. As he sat there, lost in thought, a realization dawned on him. True strength lay not in revenge, but in forgiveness. But could he forgive Clotilde and Jason? Could he forgive himself? The answers were unclear, but for the first time since the betrayal, Lawrence felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a way out of this darkness, a path leading to healing and redemption. The chapter closes with Lawrence making a decision to seek a different resolution. He knew the road ahead would be difficult and the scars of betrayal deep, but he was now determined to find peace, not through vengeance, but through understanding and forgiveness. Lawrence's journey of introspection led him through sleepless nights and long, reflective walks. He was haunted by the memories of what he had done, the lives he had impacted so profoundly. As he wrestled with his conscience, he realized that his quest for vengeance had not only failed to heal his wounds but had deepened them, leaving him more isolated and broken than before. One crisp morning, he found himself outside the house he once called home. He watched from a distance, observing Clotilde moving slowly, her once vibrant demeanor now replaced by a somber shadow. The sight of her, vulnerable and alone, stirred something in him, a sense of compassion he thought he had lost. Lawrence began to question the nature of his actions. In his pursuit of retribution, had he become the very thing he despised? He thought of Jason, a young man whose future he had sabotaged, and his son, Alex, caught in the emotional crossfire. The realization of the pain he had inflicted on his own son filled him with remorse. He longed to reach out, to repair the bond that had been strained to its limits. It was a conversation with an old friend that became the turning point. They spoke of life, of the choices that define us, and of the power of forgiveness. His friend's words echoed in his mind: revenge can bind you to the past. Forgiveness can set you free. These words struck a chord in Lawrence, igniting a desire to seek a different kind of resolution. In a moment of courage, Lawrence reached out to Alex. They met at a quiet cafe, the air filled with tension. Lawrence saw the hurt in his son's eyes, a reflection of the chaos he had contributed to. He apologized, expressing his regret for the actions that had caused so much pain. The conversation was difficult, but it opened a door to healing, a chance for them to rebuild their relationship. With Alex's encouragement, Lawrence took the most challenging step, reaching out to Clotilde. He found her in the garden, her hands in the soil, a metaphor for her own attempt to ground herself amidst the turmoil. They talked, not as husband and wife, but as two individuals who had shared a life and were now facing the consequences of their actions. Clotilde shared her own pain, her reasons for the affair, and the guilt that consumed her. Lawrence listened, not with the intent to forgive immediately but to understand. He spoke of his hurt, the betrayal he felt, and his subsequent actions. It was a conversation marked by honesty and vulnerability, a stark contrast to the silence and secrets that had once defined their relationship. As the chapter closes, Lawrence finds himself at a crossroads. He has begun the journey towards forgiveness, but the path is fraught with challenges. He realizes that forgiveness is not about absolving Clotilde or Jason of their actions, but about freeing himself from the chains of anger and bitterness. It's about healing, about finding a way to live with the scars and move forward. The chapter ends with Lawrence taking a step towards a future defined not by the past, but by the choices he makes now. It's a future uncertain but filled with the possibility of redemption and peace. In the aftermath of his confrontation with Clotilde, Lawrence found himself standing at the precipice of a new beginning. The heavy shroud of anger and vengeance that had clouded his judgment was lifting, revealing a path towards healing and reconciliation. As the days turned into weeks, Lawrence dedicated himself to this path. He began attending therapy, unraveling the layers of pain and betrayal that had led him to seek revenge. Through these sessions, he learned to understand and manage his emotions, to find forgiveness not just for Clotilde and Jason, but also for himself. The journey was arduous, filled with moments of doubt and relapse, but each step forward was a victory in its own right. Simultaneously, Lawrence worked on rebuilding his relationship with Alex. They spent time together, engaging in activities they once enjoyed as a family. These moments were sometimes awkward, sometimes filled with laughter, but always with an undercurrent of healing. Alex, who had been deeply affected by the family's turmoil, slowly began to open up, sharing his own feelings of betrayal and confusion. Lawrence listened, truly listened, providing the support and understanding his son needed. In these sessions of shared vulnerability, Lawrence and Alex found common ground. They spoke about Clotilde, about the complexities of relationships and the impact of their choices. Lawrence was honest about his actions, explaining his motivations and expressing his regret. This honesty brought them closer, bridging the gap that had formed between them. Meanwhile, Clotilde's pregnancy progressed. Despite the pain and complexity of their situation, Lawrence found himself concerned for her well-being. He offered support, not as a husband, but as a co-parent and a friend. This new dynamic was confusing at times, but it allowed them to interact without the pressure of their past relationship. As Clotilde's due date approached, Lawrence faced a critical decision. He chose to be present at the birth, not out of obligation, but out of a sense of closure and a desire to start anew. The experience was emotionally charged, a poignant reminder of the life they had shared and the separate paths they were now on. Post-birth, Lawrence saw Clotilde in a new light. She was no longer just the woman who had betrayed him, but a mother, vulnerable and strong. This perspective shift was a crucial step in his journey towards forgiveness. He began to let go of the bitterness that had consumed him, finding peace in the acceptance of their new reality. The final scenes of the chapter show Lawrence moving forward with his life. He pursued new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and even considered the possibility of dating again. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined him. The story concludes with Lawrence reflecting on his journey. He had traversed through the darkest valleys of betrayal and vengeance, only to find that the real path to peace lay in forgiveness and understanding. The chapter ends with Lawrence at the park where it all began, watching a new generation of children play. The scene symbolizes hope and renewal, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity.